let's do it. So we're gonna start the conversation about freedom. So Michael, take it away.
Yeah, I wanted to mention something Vladimir said on a previous meeting, which is that when you're so free, you start to get confused about what you really want. So it's like you're watching TV and you have 200 channels you can watch, and it's just like at some point you're just overwhelmed and like you just don't know what it is you're supposed to watch because you just don't have a clear direction.
I
Or
call that analysis paralysis.
yeah.
Us in the infinite.
Or like where I want to go to eat for dinner. Like historically, there hasn't been a lot of choices. 200 years ago, what you had for dinner, there was maybe 2 or 3 choices at most. But nowadays, you can go to any restaurant you want, so it's almost overwhelming because it's like, yeah, you're over analyzing it kind of. I guess.
Well, I look at that, and Matt, I know you know about this, but in regards to that, I almost see it as kind of an application of the axiom of choice to avoid, mathematical exhaustion, where you have a system where there's no discernible difference between a set number of variables. And pretty much it comes to the point where, well, the person or the AI, you have to choose. You have to freaking just choose, okay? Otherwise, for each instance individually, there's a saying that if I had an infinite set of pairs of shoes with numbers on the box, I could discern a theorem that could apply to all of them, that I could neatly group all of them to accountable to natural numbers using 2n and 2n minus 1 to the number on the box of all given boxes. But if that applied to socks, which you can't discern between left or right sock, you could not do that. And that's kind of how you express axiom of choice in set theory.
So I did not expect that complicated of an answer to this.
I'm sorry.
Interesting.
Yeah, you lost me at mathematical exhaustion.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But yeah, just generally, like, do we get like overwhelmed when we have so many choices? It's almost like a mental strain of which one you're supposed to pick.
One of the things I think we do as humans, and this is definitely like a part of the ego, is create a personality for ourselves that says, I am this person and I make these types of choices. I have these types of preferences and I have this, something about me in particular, right? That like will guide my choices. And sometimes if you, go too far, it restricts your freedom. It seems, again, I feel like maybe we've talked about freedom before and that perhaps there's a balance here. But it does not help us when we have a lot of choices. We have many places to eat. If you decide to say, hey, these are the things that I tend to like, even though like today you could be a totally different person in that moment, you kind of have this personal identity that one creates for themselves in order to help guide choices.
Yeah, so like maybe like you like Italian food, so you eat at the Italian restaurants over and over. But then you have to decide when you want to deviate, I guess. Yeah, or when you want to try something new, but yeah. It's at least you can filter it a little bit, I guess.
A semblance of freedom, because if you get too structured on who you are and what you like to do, are you held hostage to the persona that you created?
But yeah, I feel like it's a more recent phenomenon in history where we just have like almost an infinite number of options at our fingertips. Like you can watch any YouTube video you want. You could you can watch any TV channel you want. You can go on any website you want. So it's like this kind of explosion of things available is kind of recent, I think.
I don't think it's it is definitely more prominent today, but it's definitely not as recent as people think. Philosophers have been talking about being lost in the infinite since Kierkegaard, and Sartre talked about the excessive freedom of his time, it's approaching 100 years ago, but it's not as new. And then to Allison's point, the idea that we have these characters that we create for ourselves, and they're their tendencies. I look at that, the thing I brought up with mathematical exhaustion, I look at that as when we eventually go to inductive reasoning or inductive logic, where we go, okay, these were my patterns, my tendencies, and these create the identity of who I am. And because of that, I'm going to use that as a set of data complete sets so I can come to probable conclusions and apply them. So I am going to the sushi restaurant because I've liked sushi in the past. Granted, there is risk involved. I can turn out not to like that sushi restaurant. But the problem, as you also pointed out there, is where we adhere to those identities to a fault that we actually almost cage ourselves from growing or trying anything new or anything like that. I don't know if you were pointing out that point.
Yeah, I
Sorry,
guess
I
an
promise.
interesting question may be, do you have actually one identity or you have many of them? And if you're free, it seems that you may choose between different options. But if you have one identity, like what chooses these options? What is the self? And how the self, like if you have different preferences, does it mean that you have one self which may choose, or you have different selves, like some sub personalities, we may call them, which are always in a fight with each other, and this one that wins, it basically chooses the course of action which you're going to follow. And they're like always, like there's kind of fight between them, struggle for power.
Possible.
I feel like there's not a huge amount of controversy on this topic, which is why like
level. We talk to more subjective, it feels that we are free, let's talk about that. But it seems like there's layers. And it was an interesting point to bring up, that having like that in one person, we can contain multitudes. And then there's societal freedoms. There's all these different levels and things like that. And I think it's interesting. I don't know if a disagreement necessarily has to take place to have an interesting conversation. But one thing, and this was something I pitched way back when, probably over a year ago, with this concept of, we have intelligence quotients. It's kind of a newfangled idea to have an emotional intelligence quotient and things like that. But what about like a freedom quotient? Could we quantify freedom in the sense that, it feels that we have free will and things like that? Could we quantify that in at least our societal structure and say this person is more free than another person?
I think it depends on power. So the more power you have, the more you're free. And the less power you have, if you can be manipulated by other people, it's like the less you're free.
Interesting. Does everyone agree with that? I don't know if I
No.
do.
power, I guess it matters how you define power, like political
Yeah.
power. I'm guessing you don't mean that. You mean like some kind of a personal
No,
power.
like personal power, yeah.
Like agency.
The ability to act on your own, as Frank said, like at the beginning of conversation, because sometimes you just can't act on your own. You need to follow somebody else's, whatever commands, and yeah, but you may be free, and basically you decide what to do. You have your reasons, and you may, like, in like some simple way. For example, there is a conversation and we need to define what we have to talk about. And so you may just follow somebody else's, suggestions, or you may propose your own. And the more power you have, the more you have an opportunity to actually steer the direction for a conversation. And the less power, the less you're free, the more you must follow what others suggest to talk about, and it seems kind of, you know,
So what's the difference between powerful and free then? Because you're saying power is the ability to act on your own. Isn't that freedom? I guess what's the
well, in some
difference?
sense, yeah, they're kind of synonymous, right?
I wouldn't say they're analogous or equivalent. I usually identify power as ability to control others or one's own environment.
Well, maybe we may use the word
I could see.
strength. Yeah.
Well,
I
I
could see.
think I think those are different things, obviously, freedom and power. But there is certainly, I agree with Vladimir that there is a connection, and a very strong connection, I would even say, between freedom and power, because the lack of freedom usually comes from the lack of power. The condition of slavery is the condition of absolute powerlessness. And the condition of the master is the condition of absolute power over something, someone, or something. So
Yeah, but also if you're like in contradiction between slaves and masters, masters are also dependent on their slaves. So it means that like if you like real freedom, it's like when you're not dependent on anything,
So
on
dependency is okay.
anybody, right? You may have a lot of power, but if you use this power, to,
But
if you try to force other people to do something and you're dependent on their actions, it's like it seems that you're not free. Correct?
Right. Just
Yeah. So,
So correct me if I'm wrong. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I'm getting a feeling that there's an underlying assumption here that constraints upon freedom are necessarily a bad thing.
I'm not saying they're a
Is
bad
that what
thing.
I'm hearing from people or not?
Sounds like it just undermines your ability to be free, potentially. You think that premise, right? Is that what I'm hearing also?
well, just to give it a little bit of structure, I think the way we entered the topic is basically we're discussing not only are there different kinds of freedom, but also I think people are actually arguing, Craig, in the beginning that freedom is not always good. I mean, at least that's what I was understanding from the perspective that Michael was exposing.
That's what David brought up a little bit, if it was preferable
David
or
as well.
acceptable.
Yeah, and I agree
Fair
with that. Freedom is not, I think, you've almost immediately answered the question that freedom is not always good, because there is such a thing as too much freedom. But then again, it kind of depends on what kind of freedom we're talking about. And there's certainly a difference between, having too much freedom to choose a certain type of ice cream, and having too much freedom to decide how you're going to rule your country, for example. Those are two different subjects that usually the way people think about freedom is different. Like I prefer three
So-
types of ice cream, like that's about good for me.
Per
So I don't like
per
a
the
lot of
little
freedom
link I posted, sorry,
in that
Bruno,
case.
go ahead. I'm sorry, Bruno. Per the little link I posted in the chat, psychologically, in terms of short-term memory, we can typically deal with, I believe the famous number is 7 ± 2 things at a time in our short-term memory. If we have more than that, we just start losing our options. So in that sense, constraints that, I'm more than happy to only have to deal with 7 ± 2 choices at a time, because I think that's all my brain can work its way through.
So we're saying
and
that
that's a fairly common piece in the psychological literature about short-term memory, whether that's actually true. I'm sure it's probably not true of everybody, but as a norm. So that's freedom enough for me, is freedom to have that many choices. And I don't really necessarily need to have more choices than that, because I can't deal with more choices than that.
I understand what you're saying, but at the same time, although there is a point of diminishing return, I'm glad that those choices exist, even though I might not want them, somebody else might want them. The fact that they exist creates competition between entities that choose to get into that kind of business or activity to improve their product or service.
I think that's so we established the connection between freedom and power. There's certainly a connection between freedom and choice, and we kind of like skipped the definition of freedom, which is okay because we've
That way define freedom.
talked about it before, and I mean it's hard to give a specific definition, but there's certainly, I mean, the way I see freedom is really just your capacity to choose. So obviously it depends, like what I was saying before, you know, it depends on what aspect of your life do you want to have those choices, right? I mean, in some aspects you do want to have those choices, and in some other aspects maybe you don't want to have those choices. So
Now, I think that kind of conflates with free will, which I thought we were trying to keep.
well, it's
separate.
impossible to keep away from the free will.
I think one definitely tends to entail another. I don't think they are the same thing. I don't think one necessarily deals with the other.
I mean, I'm not sure what you mean. Like,
I think a freedom has to be the ability to act on one's desires. As I talked about earlier, I think choice has to do with the fact that one can be an agent. It has both a moral consequence to it in that sense, and it also has a sense that you're not simply of consequence deterministically, as such that your actions are not, you know, just of an algorithm or, you know, a simple an outright God or somebody outside of the glass that you call your life, the jar you call your life, has a homunculus. So,
well, if you don't think, I mean, it's fair enough. But if you don't think that freedom, like I think, like when I think of freedom, I think an ability to make choices, and by virtue of making those choices, deciding what path you're going to take in a certain aspect of your life. If you don't think that's freedom, I mean, why not? And what would freedom be to you?
yeah.
I have a question. How is there? Do you differentiate between being able to have free choice with of regard to a variety of flavors of ice cream? Does that differ from the freedom of choice of a variety of candidates for mayor?
Well, there are some things that are the same and some things that are different, right? I mean, yeah, I mean, I guess there are some similarities and some differences, like in everything else. But I'm there are some similarities there in the sense that sometimes if you have too many mayors, I mean, it'll be hard to choose just one, and your brain will hurt a little bit. But I guess it's a little bit more beneficial than having
Well, I would
several
say in both
choices for ice
cases,
cream.
sorry, in both cases, flavors of ice cream or amount of mayors both could be expressed as a variable in these instances. There are X amount of variables, you know, and we are choosing between these sets of variables as they may apply to the world that we're in.
Let me put it this way
Yeah.
to try to establish some context.
Yep.
In my town, we don't have a Baskin Robbins. So I don't have 31 flavors to choose from.
Yep.
I'm not terribly upset by that. But if I did not have the freedom to express my point of view by way of a vote with regard to the mayor, I would be very upset.
Yeah, and I think that's it does have to deal with free will, but I feel like that's more you value using mayor more so than you value having Baskin Robbins. And ergo, if you were to ask which one could go, the Baskin Robbins or mayor, you would choose Baskin Robbins over the mayor. That's more so to me an ought or a value judgment. I mean, free will is entailed in there. It is part of it.
So I think the thrust of what you guys are kind of getting at is all freedoms aren't created equal. That is, and we have different value functions, if you prefer to use that term, that we assign to different ones. Like David has a much higher value function to his mayoral election than he does to his ice cream choice. I would not be shocked to meet people who have the reverse standing. So
depends on the ice cream and it depends on the mayor.
Yeah, and well, but it's not necessarily anybody in this group, but I'm sure there are. I can think of, say, a number of 10 or 11-year-olds who that choice of ice cream may matter a hell of a lot more than a mayor that they've never heard of. But the point is
10 or 11-year-olds can't vote for mayor anyway.
So we would say their choice is null, as they can't do it. But they might still have a preference. They could
all right,
still
we
say,
have to think counterfactually here.
yeah, I know it's all ifs.
Yeah, so that might be
there are
some
plenty of people who
world
don't care about
where
the
it's
government and
possible.
they like ice cream.
What's that?
There are plenty of people who don't care about the government and they like ice cream more. I think we can just say that that's probably true and we can move on, right?
Well,
Yep, and that's true of anything that you or I might consider a freedom. There will be somebody else who has a different value function that they use to evaluate that. So when we try to talk about freedom is actually a very subjective thing, I think, is
So
kind
we
of
are
what
actually
I'm-
talking about something kind of subjective, which I think is something we can talk about. Because I think there's still factors. And I kind of liked the discussion a little bit about power. And because it wasn't something that I totally agreed with when I first heard it, when Vladimir said, perhaps that's an element you lack, maybe the power to do some, maybe you have more power, you have the ability to have more freedom. And I mean, we kind of went down a road of the master slave morality type thing. And immediately, we came down to a discussion about whether or not, physical power, someone having control over you, like a master slave situation, or being mentally free, plays a role. And I guess one question I have is, does religion, because I mean, do you think religion plays an aspect of providing a source of freedom or a sense of providing freedom for people psychologically?
Possibly, but not necessarily.
I think often it does for like people that have very repetitive lives, they've worked in a coal mine for 50 years or whatever. They just keep doing the same thing over and over, but at least in their mind, they have the ability to I guess, be a little bit more free. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I also agree that, or I should say, I also think that it can do the opposite, and that's partially that's the comforting aspect of religion, that it takes away your freedom and it gives you answers. Like it takes away when you don't have the certainty. So when you have all these possibilities of what's going to happen to you when you die, that's not a very comforting thought. That's something I struggle with personally. But when you're giving just one option and that option tends to be nice, it's much better. I mean, that's one example in which religion really streamlines things. It's like a code of conduct. That's codes of conduct in general, not just religion, are comforting because they take away your freedom, but they give you a path. They give you certainty. And that's another relationship that I want to establish, that freedom and certainty are often at odds. They're not necessarily opposites, but they seem to be at odds. a lot.
There seems to be a concept with freedom that if you grasp it too tightly, you've lost it. And I think, I mean, if we think about like Buddhism or something that like, where it's really about working through like almost like getting like being disattached or disassociated from things in the world. I mean, it provides some sense of like, you know, you might have physical hardship in this life, but you can be mentally, spiritually free. You know, and then, but then Bruno, like you said, if you go, you know, too dogmatic in rituals and principles, and you really live your life this structured way, it provides this like ultimate escapism where you're not really having to deal with making decisions. And so to me, I know that we've talked about this, but like there seems to be a balance there, and that like if you grasp it too tough, too harshly, you kind of lost it. If
Yeah,
that
it's
makes
kind of
sense.
interesting. Like, I feel like Christianity kind of was created in reaction to Judaism for that reason. They said Judaism was becoming too strict, and like they say, Jesus came to tell everyone that to no longer follow the more ritualistic aspects, but to instead follow the more spiritual aspects. So, yeah, I don't know. I just think that's an interesting historical side.
It's like always this dichotomy between the mind and the feelings, and so who is free when your heart is free? It's like your mind is a slave, and when your mind is free, your heart is, you know, your heart is a slave.
It's interesting because I was expecting us to come at it from the perspective of freedom is good, because usually people think about freedom as a good thing. About that's the value that people give freedom. You know, freedom is good, lack of freedom is bad, and I largely subscribe to that in most cases. But well, I know David is a big believer in freedom, and I mean that's part of the American ethos, right? So freedom is a big thing in American thinking. But I mean we haven't so far, but I think it would be, I don't know, I think it would be interesting to kind of like touch on that a little bit, like how valuable freedom is. Like is it really such an important thing, or it's a little bit overrated? Or like we said, like there are many different kinds of freedom, but like how important is freedom really?
I'd like to elaborate on that, but I'm going to be a kind of adversary. So
No,
for me,
go ahead, man. Just
yeah, yeah,
that makes things
for
fun.
me, as I mentioned, like I don't actually believe in choice and freedom, and I'd like to tell a personal story. So, like early in my life, I thought that like freedom is good, and if I have a choice, I must follow, you know, whatever I want. But and it led me to all sorts of troubles. Like I, you know, used to play video games a lot. I used to drink. I used to smoke. I used to do all sorts of things, which I later kind of regret. And so, and then when I, in 2012, I read Schopenhauer, and I was the first time I was introduced this idea that we have no freedom, and freedom always just an illusion. And well, I started thinking that what if it's true? It's like, what if I accept this idea and believe that there is no freedom, and everything I done in my past, it's like I kind of redeem my past from like all sorts of regret. So I was thinking, okay, it's like it was my choice. I choose to play video games. I choose to smoke. I choose to do this, choose to do that. But when I realized that there was no choice, that everything was predetermined, I actually, it's like it was kind of liberating. I realized, wow, that's cool. I did that, and there was no way to do otherwise. There is nothing to regret, and everything in the future, it's also kind of it became so clear that you can't make a mistake. You can't do anything which you actually not supposed to do, and your actions are based on your experience. And if you focus on your experience and on actions, you actually, so you may, like, it seems that you may be free if you understand that there is no freedom. And when you think that freedom exists, you are not free. You are bounded to this idea of freedom, which makes you, experience all sorts of uncertainties about the world, about what's going on in your life. Yeah, it seems like freedom on one side, it's good in terms of, you have all these opportunities. But on the other side, if you understand that your desires and your experience is determined by environment and by your, maybe your dreams or your just whatever, it makes you like free. I mean, in
You're
terms
free
of
of you're free of responsibility because
Yeah.
yeah.
The thing I would
Yeah.
like to state really quick when we have these, because we're really getting deep into with Vladimir, we're getting really deep into what's determinism, what's freedom right now, or
Well, I'm-
libertarianism, not the party, what it's called philosophically when you have free choice. But just to really quick put it out there, people should know we're kind of arguing almost in either or on each other's eyes, but there is something known as compatibilism, which is to say both
yeah, I've heard that.
instances-
Like both
yeah,
of them are
are
compatible, basically.
yeah, is that they don't necessarily negate each other, which would say that any argument against one in favor of the other is actually a false dilemma or a false
Yeah, but in terms of just feeling and experience. I, for example, studied neurophysiology and physics a little bit, not too much. And when you imagine what's going on in your brain, that you're just a bunch of neurons, and these neurons decide, like you think about decision, and you understand that it's like your decision is based on these chemicals and reactions which are going on in your brain. You may say that how it's possible that you have a free choice.
I would say those are causally linked, but they are not the choice in itself. That's how.
Yeah, but where choice comes from in this case? It seems that there's no place. There's no place. Yeah, there's no place for choice because otherwise, like you need to change something in your past to have choice.
But I think I have trouble like following that argument. I mean, I've heard it before, and I know there's a lot of people that subscribe to this there is no choice argument. But
Yeah.
for me, it's kind of yes, maybe there is a scientific perspective in which yes, there is no choice, and we're just like the result of a bunch of neurons or something like that firing. I mean, maybe that is true. But that is not really the human experience at the end of the day. Like you do make choices. Like when you're talking to your kid,
Yeah, but
or if you're a teacher, like my I have a daughter now, but she's a baby. It doesn't really count. But when I was a teacher, I wasn't like, it's not like you talk to the kids like, oh yeah, your neurons did that. They fire in a certain way. So you really have no choice here. That's not how humans like go about their lives. I mean,
yeah, it feels.
for being honest.
But
It feels as you have a choice. But have you heard about these experiments when they put like when they measured brain activity, and like it seems that you make a decision, and it feels for you that you make a decision, but your decision actually is made like few milliseconds.
It's made slightly before it.
Yeah, slightly before you are aware of that.
That's
that
neat.
decision.
But the thing that I look at it is I go, the scientific data is nice, but choice is mathematically expressible. That's where I go. And I don't know. I'm not discrediting what you're saying or anything. It's just basically our current model of set theory uses the axiom of choice in order to hold.
Yeah,
And
I think it describes the process, but I think one of the problem is that we all are, from birth, we're told that we have freedom, that we have choice, that we have, all this, and
But that's what I'm
yeah, and
saying.
it's more kind of subjective, right? So when you are conditioned from your early age to believe that there is freedom, and then you grow up with this idea, it's hard to challenge it. But when you like start thinking from the opposite side, just okay, let's
Yeah.
suppose that this is true. Let's suppose that there is no choice. And you
Counterfactual,
start looking,
counterfactual, counterfactual.
yeah, and you can start looking for evidence, and you may find just very like there are the whole like different culture and different set of ideas which may prove that this is true. And it's very hard to like I think it's very interesting
mean,
just to
I think it's cool. I think it's cool as everything. The only thing though is to put this in perspective, if someone, came up to me and said someone's schizophrenic episodes are just the result of a brain chemical imbalance, which I agree with. I would look and I said, yes, that is the result. That is the causal link, or with your areas of choice where you see the activities in the brain milliseconds before you go, those are the causal links to the choice. I would say, yes, that is. That isn't the schizophrenic episode in itself. That's not the choice in itself. That's the causal link to it.
Exactly. Let me put an example to illustrate that, because I agree with Frank. I think that he's saying what I'm thinking. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think that's the case. Look, if like, I'm sure you've liked a girl in the past. Just to give an example, like you've liked a girl in the past, right? Like you've been, like you've thought, oh, she's really cute. Yeah, I want to like go out on a date with her, right? So that is something, and you can ask her out on a date or not. I mean, that's like, those are all things that are real to you as a person. Like, that doesn't mean that you don't have a number of things determining those conditions, right? You have your hormones that are doing the work for you. You have processes in your brain that are eventually, when they are informing like all first those feelings, and then the decisions that you make and the interactions that are going to be the result of those things. So it's like what you're saying, like what Frank's saying, I believe, like there's a chain there. And yes, it all starts with the biology, and all starts, at the atomic level or at a very small level. But at the end of the day, that does not mean that we do not have certain properties as humans. Like, at the end of the day, you choose if you go out and have a beer, or if you decide to stay home and study for the test the next day. I mean, that is a choice that you can make, however influenced it is by a number of other things that are previous to that.
So
Is it
I don't know.
still, it feels like a choice, not it? I mean, are we just defining?
Feels.
Like, I think the big piece for me is just that we're talking about two different things.
Okay.
Because even if you did believe in determinism, which I am actually someone who, it's the only way that makes sense. Like, in some sense, we don't have free will, but at the same time, that doesn't help me. And Vladimir, you had an interesting story, personal story, about how when you found out, this concept of, free will maybe doesn't exist in the way I thought it was, you found that freeing, and it kind of, you chose to live in a different way because of that. But for a lot of other people, it might make them not want to live anymore, because what is the point? And to be honest, it just seems like there's not a lot of, there's not a prescription. Just because you say, in theory, free will is impossible. How does that tell us? How is that? It's not prescriptive. And I mean, it certainly feels that we have a choice, and that's a subjective thing that we, really can't prove. Consciousness is still a big question in some sense, but like, how does one live, and how does one, operate on the feeling of, it seems like we have choices.
Yeah,
and
but
we feel
see-
like we're restrained sometimes.
I would say all of you are doing that right now. Ergo, I am inferring it by seeing you here. I'm inferring that you made a choice to come to Bruno's meetup, and I did too, as I see you as analogous conscious beings, and I concern myself as a being of the possibility of choice, and ergo projected onto you as other conscious beings. So I'm a compatibilist, by the way, so I'm in both camps to a degree. So Hume's compatibilism. To be
I
exact.
think it's hard to argue that absolutely there is no choice. I mean, you can even argue that on a scientific level or on a metaphysical level or whatever. But I mean, as you know, when it comes to the human experience, of course, you know, choice is an element, right? And that is an element for any type of freedom.
But I guess we have to be more certain on it. You don't deny the possibility of choice. You deny that there is something that makes choice.
No, I
That,
don't deny that at all.
No,
That's
it's
what.
like, I
That's
mean,
the-
if you are a kind of hard determinism, you say that, oh, it's like before I believed that there's me, I, or you know, any subject which makes choices, but then I started thinking that it's just it's well, there's no such thing that makes choices. It's always changing, and whenever I make a choice, it actually changes the thing that makes choices.
Well, what I heard when you were talking about the past, that something happened and I can't go back and change it, which Einstein would definitely disagree with you.
Einstein actually was also a determinism.
Actually,
Determinism.
no, Einstein believed in determinism of Spinoza, who he was big on, and that has more to do with one's will being subjected. This is going off in the whole other area, but
Yeah, Spinoza
the
actually was also
significant-
hard. Yes.
yes, he was, but it's a very specific type of determinism. Hold on, but the whole thing about I cannot go back and change it, I think you're seeing necessity, or that this is now true of all possible worlds, as it has happened and will always be that it did happen, in
Mhm.
that it is determined, it is fixed, it can't be moved. And I don't see that so much as you are consequent of something as so much that that thing is by merit as being defined of the past, in an understanding where the past cannot be changed, that it is fixed. I don't see it as you being consequent. I just see that you've defined that the past is fixed, ergo anything in the past is fixed. And as I am
And
continuing,
therefore the future also fixed. So
that
it's-
doesn't follow. That's the thing, though. The past can be fixed, and the future can also not be fixed. That's the whole point of
Yeah, but
quantum physics.
you kind of zoom out this perspective of time, so you start thinking, what is time? Like how if
Time is a great illusion,
yeah.
just like everything else.
All of this does come down to time, but also, I mean, cause and effect, right? If you believe in, you know, science of today, you probably believe in cause and effect. And cause and effect is from all, you know, a science perspective, it's a timing, you know, that one thing, you know, comes before something else and it causes something afterwards to happen. And determinism, I think no matter which perspective and those two perspectives you take, it still comes down to this concept of like, you know, if we suppose cause and effect is a thing, I think it's very difficult to say you have free will. If you believe in cause and effect in the way that we understand it today, it's hard to argue outside of that.
I think it's actually very easy to argue for free will under cause and effect, because the rules of cause and effect that we use today are very much so an extension of Hume's work on cause and effect. And Hume, in the very same work, right next to it, wrote a chapter called Necessity and Liberty, which was about compatibilism with those rules of cause and effect, which contained free will and determinism. I mean, the thing is, we've been doing it for hundreds of years now. I could argue for free will even with an Aristotelian understanding of cause and effect. And that's the most rigorous one I know.
Maybe we should take this offline. I mean, I don't know how far we want to go because I still don't. I'm a big believer that a lot of these philosophers who ended up having to find their way to free will at some point through this kind of logical argument, like did it to appease the church. And
Hume
like
did
I
not.
just
I can say without a fact, Hume did not.
okay. And so I feel like
And Aristotle
but I
didn't,
can
because
take
the
this
church
offline
didn't
because
exist.
I don't think I understand how Hume jumps to like, you know,
Actually,
David, you're on mute. Just wanted to.
Yeah.
No, right before I told him he was on mute, he left.
Yeah, I think he probably had an internet problem. But yeah, I mean, look, this is the kind of thing like the free will argument. It really doesn't really like lead anywhere. I mean, to be honest, it's just like a very like circular. Like
That's all.
every time I had this discussion,
Analytical arguments.
it's what? Like
That's
every
all
time.
analytical arguments. They're all circular.
Well, it's just a circular argument, and I think it's like very detached from reality as well. You know, like I said before, like you can argue it on a scientific basis. On a scientific basis, yes, maybe it makes sense. And look, there are and it's true for everything in life, every single thing, that there is something that like we're talking about, you know, cause and effect. You know, there is a cause behind the effect. I mean, that's true for everything, and you can argue that that's true. Like your effect, like your decision has a cause that came before. I mean, yes, that is true for every single thing in the universe. That's how it works.
Is it though? Because if some
Well,
person made the argument of,
Yeah.
oh, I don't know,
Yeah.
Aquinas,
Gen-
that all things have cause and effect, and we
Generally
start with a
speaking.
prime mover like God.
Generally speaking, everything
Can
has
it be?
cause and effect. So like you can argue that for everything, like pretty much everything. It doesn't really matter. Like there is like, what is a choice? Choice are different possibilities. You have different possibilities as a person. You have different possibilities as a society. At the very most, we can say that it's kind of an illusion because we're like predetermined to make certain choices and choose some possibilities over others. But that doesn't mean that the process of choosing doesn't happen at all. Like at some point, like we materially choose. Like you, at the end of the day, even if you're predetermined to choose in a certain way, you do choose. Like if someone asks you if you want the red pill or the blue pill, you're gonna pick one or the other. You're gonna go through the choice process, even if it's predetermined by your brain processes and your experiences. So it's really like, honestly, it's a waste of time, you know, in my opinion. It's like a waste of time. Like it's the whole discussion is not only a waste of energy, it's a waste of time, or the other way.
Yeah, I feel like whether determinism is true or not. So we have a set of behaviors that we can that are possible, right? And as long as there are external things that limit the number of behaviors that we can do, we don't like that, or often we don't like it. We like when there's a larger possibility. Now you could say there really is no possibility because there's just one path, but I guess I think you can look on a higher level of resolution. Like, even though there may technically only be one possible way that I'm going to behave, if you sort of like scale it up and look at it from a higher level of resolution, on that higher level of resolution, you could kind of think of it as there being more paths I could take. And as long as you desire that, then I think the discussion is valuable, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know if that made sense or not. but-
No. I think this discussion is very valuable. It's actually one of my favorite areas of philosophy throughout the year. Mathematically and scientifically, it has both yielded more than probably any other philosophical field. I mean, eventually, yes, you do have to make a choice, or you do have to act or do things in your day-to-day life, whether they are a consequence of something else or of your own accord. But I guess the thing that I look,
it's like the Matrix, right?
yeah. Well, think of it this way: if you were to be a bishop on a chessboard, okay, and you get to move in every direction possible all day, you do all day, you move and you go over every black space diagonally that you could possibly move all day. The thing is, this bishop, if he has no conception of a white space, will think he has freedom to move all over the board in every way. He'll think he is unhindered and he doesn't have to worry about it. But the minute the bishop has to consider that there is a white space, that he can't move to, he all of a sudden has to question of something of his constraints of an area that he can't go, that there is a possibility. Why is that possibility? How is that possibility? And
Well, what puzzles me about that discussion is that, like, where does that lead us? Like, what exactly does that whatever conclusion you take from that, like, what does that give you exactly? Like, how are you better off? Like, in any case, like in any type of way, like, it's not even like how you're practically better off, which you're certainly not. But unless you're
I say you
Vladimir,
are.
for some reason it worked for him. So maybe
Vladimir is practically
maybe
the
in
ergo.
Vladimir's
There is
case
a
it works,
singular
but
instance.
it doesn't work for
Well,
me.
I think it helps us understand better who we are and why we do what we do.
Yeah, but
So when we-
wouldn't you say, like, this is my point. Like, wouldn't you say, even if you make a certain choice predetermined by a number of factors,
Mhm.
wouldn't you say you made the choice? Like, there are reasons why you made the choice in the way that you made it, but it's
Yeah,
still
but
like,
again, you think that there's something that you call you that makes choices. But if you get rid of this idea and try to look at the world as if there's no such thing, it is just liberating. So you consider everything what's going on as a kind of natural process, which is carries on itself. And you become a kind of observer. So you look at the world through the lenses of some conscious observer who sees, like in a movie. So it's like your life is like a long movie, like 100
well,
years
if
old
that
movie.
works for you, I mean, if that works
Yeah.
for you, I mean, for me,
Yeah,
it's,
you make
yeah.
choices. It feels as if you may choose between all possible options, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you actually make them. It just may be your feeling. And when you again, it's like the point is like you may understand this, and it may certainly help you to govern these choices better. That's the idea. So when you Frank said about this bishop. So when you understand that you are limited by laws of nature, by social laws, by all sorts of restrictions which you have, and when you just understand it, it makes you really understand what you do and why. So the point again, it's like when you believe that you're free, you actually have lots of possibilities, but and you may use these possibilities to determine like your course of action. But when you don't believe that you're free, that when you understand there's no such thing as you, that it's always changing, you are not bound to this. You don't need to choose. It's like it feels. Well, I think it's very hard to argue, but and it's like your point is that it's useless to talk about it, right? So
Well,
it's,
I think it's okay to talk about it, like, but I've talked about it for before, and I failed to see like what the point.
yeah, it seems that like I'm trying to convince, like you said before I actually started talking about this, you said that let's talk about value of freedom, like why we value this thing, why it's important, right? And I said that I'm going to play kind of adversary, say that it doesn't make any sense, that it's better to
Yeah,
not value it, and then we just got to all this loop.
but Jonathan is watching this and he's leaving us some comments and he agrees with you guys. So
Oh,
apparently
Jonathan?
it's
Cool.
it's the most popular view.
Who's Jonathan?
I don't know. He's a listener. So
Oh,
thanks for watching, Jonathan.
Thank
I
you.
feel like, you know what this kind of reminds me of? Random numbers in math. So people always talk about how there's no such thing as a truly random number because you use something to get that number. So it couldn't really be random.
Mhm.
We still call it pseudo-random because it's really hard to find that pattern that got you to the number you got. So like, even though there's no truly random numbers, for certain purposes, there are numbers which are random enough, I guess. That makes
There's
sense.
also-
There are, and radioactive decay would be an example of a truly random process as opposed to necessarily a random number. Right, because all those things, they follow long-term statistical behaviors, but how a particular, when a particular, say, uranium atom will decay, nobody knows and nobody can know. All one can know is that if you have a large quantity of them, it will follow a certain statistical law. And I feel much the same way about decision making, is that they follow long-term statistical patterns, but the individual case is the point where a choice is made, or what you might call a choice is made. So for that reason, I also kind of embrace compatibilism, because I see individual events within the long-term statistical behavior to be choices, and I make them. And whether I am my brain or I am my brain plus my body plus my environment, that's fine. I don't know that there's a huge need to make that distinction. So I'm kind of cool with that, and it's how I get around strict determinism. Like, again, the little thing that I posted in the chat again talks about a theorem that shows that any sufficiently complex system, like say me, is made up of both deterministic and random behavior. And it's in that range of random behaviors that I make what I call choices.
I mean,
You know, whether you'd call them that or not, I don't know, but that's what I'd call them.
the biggest thing about, I feel like, the free will determinism debate is it always comes down, like a lot of things in philosophy, it comes down, how do you define these two things? And pretty much the way I'm going to look at it is I'm going to go, let me give you a quick understanding of what's known as the false dilemma or false dichotomy fallacy, which is when you assert that it's an either or area when it's not. And I'm going to look and I'm going to go, if you've defined these things with any way that does not negate the other instance, I'm going to say your dichotomy where one cancels out the other is almost certainly false, is what I'm going to say right off the bat, just logically. And I feel that we can define, I have shown that we can define freedom, and I'm more than confident, given philosophical dialogue from Aristotle, Hume, and countless other.
Yeah, but you mentioned, like, you said it's ability to act according to your desires, but
Yes.
do your desires contradict each other?
My desires, okay, if they contradict each other, that wouldn't be about of determinism or anything. That'd be about of them being incoherent or
Hold on. This
non-logic.
touches on personal freedom. I like this where this conversation is going, because I think we can move on from the deterministic topic. And personal
Hallelujah.
freedom is interesting because that is, you know, it deals with a lot of different things. And it's practical, right?
Ellison and I, we have more of a practical mind, a little bit more.
I'm sorry, I don't.
By the way, Craig,
love my
Jonathan says you
abstracted
have
Craig.
good vibes. I agree, Craig. You have good vibes, and I agree with you. I like what you said about the compatibilism. I think that's what you said. I agree with you. I think that's
Just for that, I'm going to give you my sonic screwdriver here and
Oh man,
take a reading.
awesome. I think no,
Because
but I agree
that
with
was a
Craig.
choice.
I think Craig wins the argument, and he has good vibes. No, sorry guys, I derailed.
Wow, the Beach Boys are going to write a song about me. Thank you.
I kind of recall hearing about some random number generator that's like dependent on patterns in the air or something.
Yeah, so I think, yeah, Craig was like, they try to come up with all these random numbers based off of like natural physical processes, which I don't know, maybe according to like quantum mechanics are supposed to be random. I don't know a huge amount about the science, but yeah, at least I guess when it comes to making decisions, we want it to be hard. It's almost like free in a way means it's hard to predict what we're going to do. If we can predict on a very regular basis what we're going to do, it's almost like we're not free. But I'm sorry.
Wait. But hold on. Are you saying that if we're completely random, that's what we mean by freedom? That like
Yeah,
That
not
is
necessarily.
freedom. Like, oh, what am I going to choose today? Huh, I don't know. Random choice.
That's the whole
I'm free.
thing. With what Vladimir was talking about, randomnism wouldn't even necessarily deter determinism, because something can be random that it happened, but it did absolutely happen, and ergo it is deterred or fixed necessarily. That's almost
Yeah,
kind of
and
like
then-
alien.
Yeah, I think there's like the problems also with this concept of randomness, as Michael said, like you can't actually determine, like you can define it like random. There's certainly some reason why well, if we are talking about our decisions, right, you always think about them in a kind of reflective way and say, okay, why did I make this decision? And you may always find reasons why. Well, not necessarily always, but still there must be reasons why you did something. You always tell yourself, oh, okay, I did this, but why I did that? What was the point? And then you think back and you always able to find some reasons for your decisions. And in that sense, you can say that they're like random. They're always determined by some, biology, environment, whatever, your mind. Yeah.
But yeah, yeah, I don't think random equals free, but I think maybe they're correlated, like maybe there's somewhat of a connection. Like if you can be random, then you're more likely to be free than if you can't be random. I don't
Well,
know.
if we were going the route that everything is predetermined, then there's really nothing we can do that will change anything whatsoever, right? I mean, that's the logical conclusion. Like everything,
But we can, but there,
everything is
we can,
predetermined. Everything is going to happen in exact the same way, regardless of what we even try to do or think or act.
Yeah, and
but even if
But
that's
you
the
can still
case,
make what you think is a choice.
it's even if that's the case, it's about how difficult it is for us to find the pattern. So even if it had to be one way, if we have a lot of trouble figuring out what that pattern is, then I call that more random. If we have trouble figuring out
Even if it's not actually random, the appearance of randomness, so the complexity is, as long as it doesn't seem like things are determined, then we are free.
Yeah.
Let's say okay, let's take away the element of choice for a little bit, because we can't get out of this quicksand.
Okay.
Let's take out the element of choice, and let's just say it's when you're free, you have a will, right? No one's like determining what you're gonna do for you, like no one's imposing their will on you. And let's try to use that instead, right? And in that sense, you have a number of different ways of being free, right? You have the very basic way, which is like you can go wherever you please, when you're not in jail or you're not a slave, or you have a minimum of personal, like you're a free man or free woman, like you have a minimum of freedom. Then you have like the political freedom, which is basically the ability to govern yourself, democracy, and so on. So usually in those ways, and also you have economic freedom, you have a number of different types of personal freedom. In those ways, we usually attribute a positive value to freedom. But even in that sense, maybe there is a way in which freedom can be overrated. What do you guys think about that? For example, like people have been talking about like politically about for example, we had that discussion in the chat about the vaccines, right? Should people, because they are free, should they be should they be able to choose just not to take vaccines or not to wear masks? Is that a freedom that is valuable, or some freedoms are not that valuable?
yeah, I think so. This is kind of a different tangent, but in some ways, I think freedom makes a more fragmented society, because it means everyone can go off in their own direction, right? So it means that like we have less common culture in our society when everyone is very free. And I think that's probably a trade-off worth having, but it's still a trade-off to note, sort of, in my opinion.
Yeah, I know, I agree, and I think that I still very much think that freedom is there is a positive element to freedom. I mean, it's mostly a positive thing, but I do think there can be too much freedom. Obviously you can't have unlimited freedom. That's not necessarily a good thing, even though you can have too much of a good thing, right? And to put it very, very simply, and I think this is the case with freedom as well.
I think we might have talked about this at one point, actually on this channel even, about like the mask wearing and freedom. And I think one of the things that at least I came to as a conclusion was that this, saying some things like bad or good, it's all about scale and quantity. And, I think one of the unique things about being a human is having the freedom to act differently than your peers. And I think that's just, you have this ability to be, and at least in a seemingly short lifetime, to do different things. And it feels like you have free will and you're not attached to another human being. Therefore, it is an act of almost human nature to have some sort of agency to choose what you get to do. But that being said, I mean, if you're in an urban setting and there's lots of people around you, that it hits up against other people. So if you live out in the middle of nowhere, your freedom could be a lot harder to do different things because you're just not interacting with other people, because other consciousness are almost the boundary, or seeming, if you believe in other consciousness, I guess. Where's Frank when you need him? But
yeah, because the whole reason I decided to do freedom this week was because last week we were talking about war, and David was very much interested in the concept of freedom and the American Revolution, and that was basically that was one, freedom was one reason to where war can be justified, where it can be justified to start a war, like in the context of the American Revolution, for example. And then we kind of like went on a tangent about freedom. Politically, is that the best? So is freedom the best way to organize ourselves? Is it a fundamental fundamental condition for a good political system going forward?
As opposed to what?
As opposed to non-freedom, lack of freedom. Well, I know your answer, David. I'm just trying to start some shit.
Oh boy.
I'll jump in and say I'm probably pretty good with social contract theory in this case, that freedoms are constrained by the requirements of the other people that you share the society with. And again, I'm good with that. I don't require absolute freedom, and I actually don't think anybody else does either. On the other hand, we do require some freedom in the civilization, or things will never change. And so think of it in terms of boiling water, and you start getting bubbles that come up in the water, but you can't predict which bubbles are going to come where. In a culture, you need the equivalent of the bubbles, and those are the things that are the institutes of change within the culture. Otherwise, the culture will grow stagnant and die, and we would perhaps consider that to be a bad thing, or not. In some cases, cultures deserve to die, but does any of that make any sense whatsoever to anybody?
I just jumped back in, so I can't.
It was certainly nice. I don't know if it made complete sense.
Certainly nice. Okay.
Yeah, no, but it was very enlightening in some way.
You think so? I doubt that, but okay.
I guess the question is should we try to do something to promote as many bubbles as possible, or are bubbles free people, or I
Hey,
don't understand.
bubbles are just gonna happen on their own. I don't know that you can't really promote them, and nor can you squelch them completely. That is, I suspect, the human condition and perhaps a condition of nature. And you can try to fight it, but I think you're gonna lose that fight ultimately. So in terms of designing a society, I think you want a society that should be as free as possible, but no more than that. And good luck defining what that is.
I mean, I would say in defining, saying, should we have as many bubbles as possible? I mean, I see the bubbles that everyone's in socially, or the person with ultimate freedom. I look at them as kind of like an ant in a big jar that will never reach any of the sides of the jar, or that bishop on the board that will never go to the white sides or anything. They think they're free. They think in every essence that, their movements aren't determined or in any way are of their own until,
Now,
they're
wait a minute.
hindered.
Before you help me understand how it is that we know what an ant is thinking.
Oh, I have no idea what an ant is thinking. I'm not arguing for an ant's consciousness. I'm not even arguing for a bat's consciousness. I'm basically just saying that I'm using a counterfactual, as Craig would put it. I'm creating a system where I'm basically saying it doesn't have to be an ant. It could be any given being where the being is X, is in a system where it is unaware of any inhibitants. Okay. And basically, I'm saying if we are outside looking at that thing, as we are to observe it, to the best to our degree of certainty, we're not going to be certain. We're only going to be supported by evidence and observations. That thing, we would say, would probably think it's free. It'd be probably, wouldn't be certainty. But the thing is, just like the bishop or people on social networking or anything, and all in their own bubbles, is the minute they get checked by another person with another inhibitions, another sufficiently complex system next to them, they all of a sudden realize, oh, my values, or not just values, thoughts, any concept expressed is not necessarily unhindered. It can be checked. It can be hit by the government, other people, or anything like that. And I mean,
Yeah. I think on a social level, it's a very powerful idea which may unite people, right? So when you suggest that we are free and we may create kind of free society where everybody is willing to do what they want, it's very powerful. But on a conceptual level, when you start thinking about what does it actually mean to be free, that's where there are lots of problems, and it's very hard to determine, to define.
True. In a way, like what I was trying to ask, I guess, was in a sense, can we have too much freedom in a democracy? Like when is it too much freedom?
I think you can have too much freedom in any system of government.
Yeah, when you don't do
a system of government, or just in being, you can have too much or too little freedom.
Yeah, but like in an authoritarian system, usually having too much freedom is not much of a concern. That's why I asked about it.
I guess too much is when you are have all these possibilities, but you don't actually do anything. You just waste your time.
I think the authoritarian government would be like if we were viewing our ant in that jar, instead of having a vast area where it doesn't run up against side, it's a very small jar where we see the ant constantly bogging off every single side. And we have much reason to think this is much more likely that this thing doesn't feel free or feels constrained. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't feel free, because I don't know what the ant is thinking, but it gives me more reason to think possibly it doesn't feel free.
And I guess to answer Bruno's, to touch it again on Bruno's question, the ultimate freedom would sort of be anarchy, right?
Correct.
Mhm.
As long as you have as long as you have laws, like you have to stop on a red light. I mean, that's impinging on your freedom, right? You have to go to school. Any sort of law.
Yeah, we go back to Leviathan, right? To
But what if my
Tom Cobb.
desire to express of my act is to follow the law?
but go
Yeah,
ahead.
but
Michael, I
there
didn't
will
mean to
always be
interrupt.
some people. There will always be some people that don't desire to follow it. So you're never
There
truly
will not.
free.
Never mind.
Mhm.
Well, no, but I think yeah, that's exactly right, Michael. I mean, if you have like absolute freedom, I think you almost go full circle, right? Because you get to anarchy, there's no laws, and then you get Hobbes in the state of nature, in which in fact you have all the freedom in the world, but you do not have all the freedom in the world, because without the constraint of laws, some people, the stronger people, will inevitably impose their will on others. So you will lose your freedom, right? Not because of the government, but because of other people that will take your impose their will on yours. So there needs to be some sort of balance, and politically, I mean, it doesn't seem that the concept of unlimited freedom is really feasible, like you just pointed out. Also, when American democracy was at its start, at its beginning, Alexis de Tocqueville, he talked at length about democracy in America and about the problems that unchecked democracy could present, like the tyranny of democracy, right? The tyranny of the will of the people. Because so that's why you need these checks and balances, because unchecked democracy can also be dangerous. It's just the will of the mob, essentially. Right. So
Yeah, there has to be some restrictions in place. So yeah, I don't think too much freedom will eventually be bad. But I'm also kind of interested in more of like things like social norms. So I'm trying to think. I feel like most of them have gone away in American society. But are there any things that it's like you're expected? I don't know, meetings you're expected to attend, or like certain social norms that sort of limit your freedom a little bit, but could be for a positive outcome.
In the US, well, for one thing, you're expected to consume like hell, right? And consume and throw away and replace. And that's been ingrained pretty deeply into our little American psyches for, at least as long as I've been alive, and I'm sure even predating that. So.
well, you actually asked the question that I wanted to ask you and everybody else, Michael, which is if even in our current state, are we still free, right? We do have some political freedoms for sure in the West, but that is a different thing. Maybe we're not free in other ways. Like, are we really as free as we think we are, or is it sort of like that's something that I think about quite often. Like, is this like, do we have more of an illusion of freedom, even in the sense of society, than we actually have freedom? Like, yes, people theoretically they elect their representatives in representative democracies, but does that really mean that their representatives are really governing for them, and is there really much of a difference between that and having a monarch that will rule for them? Yes, there is a difference to some degree, but what I mean here is like, to what extent are people really able to determine their fate?
Well, not to go back to the Republic, but oftentimes when we go this, I don't know, political route, it comes up. But like, so, I mean, Socrates pointed out the fact that, this concept, a little bit of like the tyranny of the masses, that essentially that's what a democracy is, right? It's ruled by people's kind of self-interested desires. So, is someone really that free if the only thing that's really driving them are, their own self-interest, feeding their family and consuming and doing things that are, personally for them to gain?
So freedom is when you transcend your own interests, like when you can think beyond them, I guess.
Enlightenment, man. No, I'm just kidding.
I would agree with that.
Frank's like,
Nah. I mean, the thing is, in our current situation, our government, I look at it and I go, yeah, I'm going to always come down. It's going to be very unsatisfying. I'm always going to come down to a kind of subjective perspective. I'm like, I don't know. Do you feel free? Because it is a very, person of interest question, because, if one person says they feel free, and the qualifier free here is the real feel free. Feel is the problem. Allison, I think, pointed this out, is the problem logically. If someone says they feel free, I cannot adequately negate that. I cannot say, no, you do not feel free. How the fuck would I even support that argument?
okay.
Well,
guys,
forget the feel then. Like,
Okay.
are people
No, I think the feeling is really important, but I think there's something more here, is that like, because you can't tell someone they don't feel free, but you can certainly see, I'm gonna go back to the chess example because I'm gonna bring it to this level of freedom that we're talking about, which is, I mean, if you're a bishop and you're watching a bishop who, number one, doesn't, see, let's say, white squares, but also doesn't realize they can go vertical and, horizontally across the board either. And you're the queen watching, this silly piece only go, diagonally all the time. I mean, in that case, like, the bishop might feel free and the bishop can say they feel free, but, certain pieces, a pawn might go, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, the bishop seems pretty free, freer than me, but,
Have you ever tried going 2 spaces forward on
Yeah,
your
hey,
first move?
it can even feel free being surrounded by pawns, like from all sides, and,
And
and
if you
still
tell
have
the
feeling of
bishop-
freedom.
if you tell the bishop try to go forward, I mean, you're gonna create an existential crisis for the poor bishop, man.
God, Michael, I
ruin the
did
bishop's
not play
life.
chess before this, but I might start playing chess because chess
I-
is such a great philosophical tool.
Bear in mind though, that if a
Like-
pawn makes it all the way across the board, it can be promoted to be a queen, whereas your bishop can't.
True.
So
the
in
pawn
a
is-
sense, the
pawn
pawn
is more
actually
free.
has more power than the bishop. How about that? How about them apples?
Well,
anyone.
you Allison brought it back to Plato's Republic, and I feel like that's more of an instance of the allegory of the cave, where the person who has a higher enlightenment basically is coming back to someone who has a lesser enlightenment and is basically trying to explain all the possibilities, the conceivable world. Modal logic, we would call this the possible world. That could be to these people, though it has not been necessitated or actionable through the facts that they have. Dear God, I'm going deep. Fuck me.
To
Gone deeper, believe me. I've
to-
all experience.
to Allison and Frank's point, this is a slightly different example, but it might help drive it home a little bit, or maybe it's totally wacko. I don't know, but let's just say, for example, that the bishop does not know that pieces move in his universe horizontally. He only knows about diagonal movement. And along that same line of thinking, let me take this into the real world. If, for example, in the Taliban society, as I understand it, women are not allowed to be educated. And the women, as I understand it, some, not all, but some, think that's a good idea. And do we view them as free to choose if they don't know any better, if they're not taught? For example, would you take a child's word for it that growing up with a pedophile is a good idea? No, because that child can't make that decision. They don't know enough to make that decision. So society has to make that decision for them.
Okay, but I would feel
That's my thinking.
okay. So the society helps enlighten the child in that instance. So I don't know. The thing is, going back to Allison, I would say that the person who went out of the cave has a greater conceptual or imaginative basis for what is possible at that instance. And at that point, when he's coming back and introducing the ideas to the other people, you know, Plato, not actually Socrates, basically said, you know, the other people would reject it as folly or foolhardy. And the thing that I see about our bishop moving around the area, you know, that could be possibly, you know, interjected by the queen, you know, to say that there are white spaces and that you are being hindered to move to them. Well, the thing I would look at that as I was go, could the bishop even begin to conceive of white spaces and what it means to not be able to move to them? Or when we are informed of our hindrances, of the things that are hindering us to that we have not recognized prior, could we even be able to, again, to contextualize them practically on our day-to-day lives? That's how I move that area. For instance, if any of you are a fan of Lovecraft, as I am, perhaps I could say that, nice. Perhaps I could say that all your doings, everything that you do in your life is completely just a consequence of the great dreamer Azathoth, the chaotic, idiotic god.
Man, this is a good conversation.
Yeah.
We're talking
And-
H.P. Lovecraft, chess, and philosophy at the same time.
And the thing is, by definition, Azathoth, you could not even begin to comprehend him or even begin to put him into context, much like the white space of the bishop or of the people that are sitting in the cave. It's so far out of complexity, it would drive you mad. But the thing is, can something that you cannot comprehend, that you cannot have knowledge of, that you cannot in any way contextualize, even conceptually on a metaphysical level, can it be said to be anything that you can in any way say hinders you? I would say not. I could say it could not even be.
I would say it does. And I would say it does because of this. Let's say, for example, a chicken grows up to be an adult with a piece of the egg it hatched from covering one eye, and the chicken doesn't even know it. I think we have a responsibility to enlighten that chicken.
The chicken?
Yeah.
That's a great example. You have a part of the shell covering your eye your whole life, so you don't even know it's there because it's always been there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you have to convince the chicken that it has, so it's rigorous. So I have to convince
The chicken is just an example.
Yep, but convincing it is rigorous.
Well, this is a real
It's
thing.
like
Like
It's like the people in the Matrix, you know?
Yeah.
No, but this scenario is real. Some people could never hear their whole life, and then they give them some hearing aid, and then they can hear. Or same with maybe the
But
same.
that's not the same. That's a simple physical default where someone is being, you know, cured of an ailment or anything. The chicken bird has a thing over its eye and it's hypothetical. We've never said if it actually removed it. We've simply said that I have to convince the chicken that it has a thing over its eye. And
I want to know what Vladimir has.
Yeah, Vladimir, what are you wearing?
Like, I'm
So
much more
it's-
interested in
it's-
Vladimir
it's
than
a-
I am in the chicken right now.
It's actually I see all of you upside
Is that
down.
Vladimir? I thought that was Batman.
No. It's like it's
Vladimir.
it's a
Vladimir.
special tool which makes the world look upside down. So I all see you like reversed. I mean,
Yeah, upside down. Yeah.
it's like
And I think isn't there something in our eye that flips the image
yes,
to make it
You're
look
seeing
like
it how it really is.
Yeah.
No,
I
it's like
mean-
there's mirrors, and they
Yeah,
make.
I was thinking
ma-
mirrors, right? Because
Yeah, they make all my vision reversed, and they're
Yeah.
it's like this is actually there was
But-
some psychological experiments, and some people wear these like glasses for days, and after like 5 days you adapt to every like to your environment, and you may act as if like everything is it's so it is the same as in usual when you just go when you well, it's hard to explain. Anyway, so the idea is that it's hard to adapt, and your brain just adapts in like not quickly, but in some period of time, and you perceive everything as if it's natural, even if it's upside down. I mean, now when I put on these glasses, it's hard for me to move. I can't like
Yeah.
I can I'm very limited in my movements, and it influences my movement a lot. But if I just wear it for a certain time, I can see as if it's natural, like to look at the world upside down. And it like brings to like this point about being aware of your perceptions, and like to be free to choose how you perceive the reality. So in some sense, you may just reverse the whole world upside down and just look at the world
You
from
would never know any
this.
different, right?
Yeah, exactly.
The whole thing though about the chicken with the egg on the shell though, the thing that I love about that is I look at it and I go, the thing is, I can make every rigorous, convincing argument. This is going back to choice that I want, but the chicken has to see, it has to modest opponents. It has to have a choice. It has to have an area where that is sufficient to believe that it has the shell on its eye, that to remove it or something like that. So
man, why were we talking about the chicken? I like how when did
I
this
just
start?
did modest opponents.
I-
You're
I-
arguing about the
So-
chicken?
We've been going about the chicken for a
Do,
while.
may I say
forgot
two
the
quick
origin
things here?
story. What?
I was going to-
May I say two quick things here?
Of course.
One
Chris.
of them is there is, of course, a growing philosophical movement about from people who we normally would consider to be disabled, where they not only reject that labeling, but they get very angry when people try to say they will fix or cure whatever condition that the rest of society thinks they have. Especially there's movements amongst deaf and blind people for that. The other thing is, of course, before, remember we were talking about the people coming up as bubbles. A lot of the time it's the people who are different in some way, perhaps like that are the people who become the bubbles who instigate the change. So not only do I think we don't necessarily have a moral obligation to try to make those folks like us normal people, there's actually some fairly good cultural evolutionary ideas to make us, want to A, leave them alone, and B, obviously let them have the freedom to make their own choice about that.
Absolutely, they should have the freedom to make their own choice.
And
But-
there's an interesting
but-
Twilight Zone episode, or maybe a few of them that that talk on that specific kind of issue.
No, that the bishop could conceive white assumes the axiom of choice. The fact that I could seem the outside of the cave assumes the axiom of choice. And as we go on to the areas of freedom that is to be applied to in areas that we cannot conceive because of metaphysical and knowledge areas, it conceives the axiom of choice.
And
as
if
declared
Frank
analogous.
slows down for just a
Don't-
moment,
don't
I'll point out
overheat,
to him
Frank.
that if you assume the axiom of choice, you're going to get the Banach-Tarski paradox, Frank. So be prepared to deal with that.
I'll deal with it.
Okay.
Craig, I think you are correct that they should have a choice. But I think we can also tell them how remarkable and how different the world looks with two eyes.
And they can tell me how remarkable it looks without.
Yeah.
And their point of view is equally valid with mine as far as I can tell.
And to be clear, I'm not talking about how remarkable the world is with or without, but I'm just simply talking about what is the necessary, what is necessary to be able to convince somebody that they have the shell or the face, that they're only on the black squares, or that they're in the cave, or any of those? What would be the conceptual possibility necessary to convince them of that?
Yeah, I mean, read Flatland, guys, and
Yeah,
watch what
yeah.
happens when the people in Flatland meet the people coming from Sphereland down to see it, and how do they perceive that? That's my version of the parable of the cave is Flatland.
Yeah.
That's
And I would actually say, in all instances, we've seen this introduced throughout history. This is going back to Kuhn, and I know you love Kuhn, Craig. But the idea, when people come about with these new ideas, like when you were talking about these people that we cultivate with these newer and weird ideas, oftentimes, no, they are not accepted at first. And convincing somebody of something rigorously versus doing it through evidence is like the difference of, trying to dance in a small circle versus trying to dance on, on the head of a pin. The head of a pin is rigor versus the circle evidence, if you're unclear.
If I can put that from my perspective, I don't know who said this. It's not original to me. I think it was a contemporary of Mark Twain, and I think I've quoted it here before. It's easier to fool people than that they have been fooled.
Yeah.
And I think there's an element of truth in that.
Well, people don't
Yes.
like to feel stupid, so there's definitely something to that.
But
And the minute you make them feel stupid, they're going to stop listening to you.
So
Usually.
QAnon comes to mind.
so the significance of declaring the axiom of choice for all those instances where you're talking about someone who could possibly be hindered but unaware of their hindrance is understanding in order to declare determinism, there has to be, or determinism from an outward or meta source, that there has to be an axiom of choice, as I've declared with my analogy as I declared it.
I'd like
Let
to
me be
bring
the
up
first to
something.
say that makes no fucking sense at all.
Yeah, it doesn't. Hold on, give me a second.
So I wanted to bring up, we talked about this
Let me
dynamic
clear it
where
up.
when you have fewer choices and another choice comes about, it feels a lot greater than when you have many choices and another choice comes about. So, for example, let's say you've only had 2 TV channels for the past 30 years, and then they add a third TV channel. That's like, whoa, that's a really big deal. But let's say there's 300 TV channels, then they add a 301st channel. That's like, not a big deal, So I wonder, in what situations do we want fewer choices because we enjoy when you get that next choice, it feels really good. And in what situations do we want like 300 choices?
And I'm concerned that if we say, oh, hey, yeah, it's okay if you limit our choices, that the people who make those decisions will give us all shopping and religious channels.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's some sort of like advertising AI figuring out this right now because they benefit from it. And that's just like the advertising companies. I'm sure we'll figure it out. I'm sure, or if you're on Instagram and you're being tracked, they know. And I say there's always this funny scenario that if this is, and I don't know if you guys can identify with this, but if you're ever going shoe shopping and you're debating between 2 pairs of shoes and you go back and forth, there's always this rule that you turn and you look for a third pair of shoes because that's usually going to be the one you go with. It's this
Allison,
magic number of
you're
three.
talking to a bunch of dudes here. It might not be the case.
I've gone shoe
Well,
shopping. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
did see
right.
If you're ever in that scenario,
If I was going to choose between my wrestling shoes, my Adidas Sixes, or my Chuck Taylors for powerlifting, yeah, that came up.
I did see a picture of an aisle in an auto parts store that was all these different varieties of oil, quarts and cans, and massive. And the caption was, Now I know how my husband feels when I ask him to pick up tampons at the grocery store. Nobody
Have you
gets it.
seen have you guys seen the I know we're like getting close to time here, but like have
There's,
you seen
there's
like the
too many
videos?
selections. I'm gonna have to read all of those until I find the one that meets all the criteria that my husband gave me.
Okay.
That's terrible.
But they have these TikTok videos, or like I think they're TikTok, where like women will ask like their boyfriends or husbands to like go into the stores to buy them feminine products that like don't exist.
Yeah, I've
Yeah.
heard of that.
They're definitely entertaining.
I did not see that.
So Craig,
I've certainly gone in to have to buy them, but no, I have never run across that particular game.
When
They,
I
like,
was 12, I worked in a hardware store, and the guy sent me down the street to buy a door stretcher.
yeah,
So I know what.
he didn't give you headlamp fluid or a left-handed crescent wrench.
Yeah.
I think Michael, I'm gonna kind of cheat a little bit. I'm gonna answer your question, but not very directly, like not super directly at least. But I think number one, like one case in which we would definitely benefit from last choice. I think that's pretty much like almost everything in society right now, because we're like certainly living in a world that we're being overwhelmed by choice. Like the amount of information that is coming at us, it's so overwhelming and it's so fast that I think I mean, it's really hard for people to cope with that, because we're really, I don't think our brains are designed to operate in this way. It's just way too much information. It's an overload of information. So in many ways, I think for us to find streamlined ways to go about our lives and kind of like organize all this madness, I think it would be more beneficial than not. The other side of the equation is like, where can we benefit from more choice? And I wouldn't say it's so much about numbers, but I do think that our ability to achieve the lives that we want to achieve, I think our ability is actually diminished. Like in spite of all these choices, like the quality of life of middle class, for example, now is worse than and this is like in actual metrics, you know, than the quality of life of middle class in the 1970s. Even though there's much more wealth in the world, it's so hard for like the young generations now, for like millennials and younger people to actually build a life and have a family, even just like with
Bruno,
what
did they have Netflix?
what
Did they have Netflix?
No, they didn't have Netflix, so they're losers. But still, we have troubles, we have issues, and yeah, no, I mean,
Now,
we do have
Bruno, do you-
Netflix, but we have lots of issues, and I think that there is to a large degree, it's an illusion of freedom, because we have freedom in some sense. Like there is a quite a degree of political freedom that we almost take for granted, but we do have it in the West. And but we lack a lot of freedom. Like we lack a lot of economic freedom. Like people now, they graduate from college and they're settled by debt, so they're really slaves economically. Obviously not personally, but they're, you know, they're settled by debt. They're, you know, most of their adult lives. I mean, there are many ways in which we are not free to make our own choices in life, and so I think that we have too much choice in some ways and too little choice in other ways. And I think that is largely a consequence of financial imperatives that favor the corporations and do not favor the people. So yeah, I mean, that's what I think. I think we have too much choice in some areas and too little choices, or not so many
Now, are you
little
talking
choices,
about
but
all
little
corporations?
possibility to achieve things in other areas. Go ahead,
Are
Dave.
you talking about all corporations or just big ones?
Just the way the economy, the way the structure of power has crystallized over the last 3 or 4 decades, you know, because largely because of fish keep eating fish until they become very large fish, and then individuals are very, very little in comparison to those really big fish. So we've lost a lot of power, and that's also concerning for democracy, because democracy without a powerful citizenry is well, it remains to be seen, but it might not be a feasible proposition. So, but yeah, I mean, we have some issues. For example, like the degree of economic inequality. If it continues increasing, I think you guys saw that, because I shared that interview with Bertrand Russell. It was Bertrand Russell in the 1950s talking about how we need more economic equality. So like that economic inequality was becoming a problem. That was in the 1950s. I mean, compared to like our situation now, the 1950s was like, it was nothing compared to today. So and we're going in the wrong direction. So yeah, so in some ways we are becoming less, certainly in my opinion, less free, even though we have more choice of TV channels now.
George Carlin has a bit where he talks about he has a bunch of bits actually where he talks about the illusion of choice. He goes, you have 30 different flavors of ice cream, you have 10 different kinds of bagels you can buy, but the important things, there are only a couple. I don't know if I agree with that, but it's a funny act, so I'd recommend it. Yeah.
Okay, so we have an illusion of freedom, but is there an illusion of oppression that we're also like?
That's interesting. Elaborate.
I don't know. I mean, all the things, there's plenty of why does it feel like we have a lot of choices? It's because we're getting a lot of information coming from different places. And we're like, we can choose to watch something, we can choose to look at this. And I would say we also can choose to focus our energy on certain like narratives that oppress us as well. So there's certain things that there's like all these videos online where like you can choose almost any minor thing to interact with in the world and create a narrative story about how there's some sort of oppressive nature to like the fact that you can't buy a certain type of thing, or that you walk in and somebody says a phrase to you that you can interpret in a certain type of a way, or that subscribes to some sort of oppressive narrative too. And I'm not saying that there aren't like legitimate.
No, I agree. I
narratives.
agree with you. Yeah. No, I think you're right. Yeah, that is
But
something.
it becomes difficult to, I think, because there's so many things, so much oppression narratives out there, it becomes difficult to know what's real. And, because the waters get muddy. And so then when people start talking about something that feels really oppressive, there's so many other not valid things maybe, or like questionably oppressive things out there that it all becomes the same.
Well, look at the mask thing. I'm just going to help you, give you an example. Look at the mask thing. People are saying that they're feeling very oppressed because they had to wear a mask not to spread a disease. I mean, that is not oppression. Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry, but it's not, Besides, I mean, I don't think it was even against the law not to wear a mask. Maybe in some places after a certain time. But look, it's just common sense, right? I mean, you wear a mask in order to save people's lives. I mean,
I guess the challenge is how do you persuade the people who think that there shouldn't be regulations about masks? How do you persuade them that they're wrong?
I don't think you can, because look at the documented instances of people swearing up and down that COVID was not real as they were dying from it. And if you get to that point, I think trying to persuade people about masks, man, that's, yeah. Good luck.
Well, I go back to that quote that it's sometimes easier to fool people than it is to persuade them that they have been fooled. But that nevertheless, it is our challenge, right? Sure, we won't persuade all of them, but we have to try.
Allison, go ahead. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
Oh, no, you're good. I don't think I have anything more to say.
Well, the whole, I mean, there's, yeah, I mean, you're sure, like, you're surely right. I mean, there is, I mean, YouTube is a fantastic instrument to find narratives of oppression that are not perhaps true, you know. So
Yeah, I think when we focus on just a few narratives of oppression, it crowds out other oppression that's also real. So I feel like that's one of the tricky things with oppression narratives is that there are people that get oppressed for things that we wouldn't even think of just because we listen to the same narratives. But like, I don't know, maybe some guy has some disease that we've never heard of because not many people have it, but so maybe it hurts him, but we don't focus on it because we're focused on the other. So I feel like oppression it comes in many forms, and I feel like it's best not to get fixated on just a couple because there's a lot of people that are hurting in very different ways. Yeah.
Right. And there are some like mass movements where people are like, you know what, there's enough people talking about this particular type of oppression that we're going to suddenly recognize this as being a major thing that society should take care of. But, you know, you're always going to get people who are all over the board because, you know, it's their freedom and, you know, they view that that's not an oppressive issue to them, that there's more oppressive issues out there. Everyone's oppressed. I don't know. It's just, it's a little messy.
Yeah, and again, if you have a choice, right, the oppression provides you with opportunity to fight back. So in every oppression in this sense may be considered as something positive. I mean,
Yeah,
you're
right. It's a give and take because I think maybe it's not from a logical standpoint, but people view it as, you know, if one person's oppressed, I am benefiting.
Yeah, but you may choose to be a victim, or you may choose to act and try to fight back, and you know, basically overthrow your oppressor and become free, right? Free yourself from. And it seems like, you know, when you think about the society on a societal level, like if there's any oppression, you may, if you believe that you're oppressed by somebody and you can't do anything, you basically doomed to like be controlled by somebody else. But if you just allow this possibility that you may fight back and you may always win and you may always liberate yourself by doing that, it gives you an opportunity to, like, again, choice. Like it seems that you have choice to choose. But again, if you think that there's like everything is predetermined, it's still like you still may have a choice, but it must be determined by and again, what determines it? Your nature, or its society, or its environment.
How do you define determined?
Full circle.
God damn it.
Yeah, I'm actually thinking about it like for 9 years. I mean, this idea like amor fati and determinism, it's so like I can't understand it. Like I can't say that I fully understand how it works, but still, whenever I try to think about it, it gives me more and more like thoughts and ideas, and it always like kind of fresh idea which I can never exhaust. And it seems like, yeah, as Bruno said, like it's kind of loop. You can just you can't make a lot of sense out of it, but it still like provides you with a lot of, you know, like on an emotional level. It certainly helps. It helps to regulate.
Don't knock loops, dude. All of mathematics and all of logic love their goddamn circles and loops.
Mm-hmm.
They are all day.
I like this idea that you brought up, Vladimir, that we all have oppressions, you know, sources of oppression, and we can choose to basically complain about it, and we can choose to try to overthrow them. I think that's an interesting image.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be for people, right?
That's how actually you become free. So you just find this hindrance, and if you choose to,
I tend to think most types of oppression are so unique that most people may not even understand them. So like there's certain kinds, there's racial discrimination, gender discrimination, alcoholism. So
What are
those
you saying?
those cover a lot of ground, but there's kinds of discrimination that are so subtle that like no one relates to it, like just a certain family situation that's really unique, or a certain, I don't know, job situation that you had that's so unique in the way that it oppressed you, that like you try to describe it but nobody really gets it.
Let me give you an example of something that I think is so a subtle form of a kind of oppression.
Yeah.
We are told by the government and various moneyed groups that it's good for us to eat fish. And so we eat shrimp and salmon and lobster and sea bass and all those things. Well, the subtle oppression is so subtle, it's invisible. What they don't tell you is that human slave labor is used on fishing boats. And there are over 4 million fishing boats. There's not slaves on every one of them, but human trafficking and fishing is deeply intertwined. And not, on the one hand, telling us that we should eat fish, and on the other hand, not exploring slave labor on boats is deceptive and oppressive, if you ask me.
Sure, but on the other hand, most of us are having this conversation on phones and computers and tablets that were probably manufactured under conditions of slave labor somewhere. So,
In East.
hey, yeah, it's everywhere.
But it's almost like it seems so attenuated, because it's not something we have to face every day, and until it's something that we, seems like it's in our country, in our backyards, it's on a video that we can understand in our community, people tend to not really, it doesn't sink in, and that's what I think is hard about today's, like, in globalization, things with technology and with like the ability to get objects and things all across the world that we never see its creator, and we don't have a relationship with them. It's taking almost a little bit of like the humanity out of it in some sense, and the oppression, and that the reality of it is, it's just, we can't see it, therefore it's not like really a reality, I think, in our little minds.
I think
Yeah.
we can't see it until this is almost idiotic, kind of is. We can't see it until we can. It's almost like the manager who, we're working at our job, we're having a good time, everything's going along, we feel free, and we can do what we want to do to up to a point, till our manager comes up and says, "Hey, I need you to work the weekend." And it's like, oh, my freedom just got checked. It just got pushed into the area. At that point, prior to that, the conception of working the weekend wasn't part of your logical inference. You were concluding inductively from patterns past that you would not be working that weekend. Your manager, very much at that point to me, is like the queen coming up to the bishop and going, "Hey, there are white spaces," at that point. And you're going, "What the fuck? This was not supposed to be a possibility." And you're having to deal with it. God, I love that analogy. God, I'm going to have to start playing chess. But yeah, that's what's going on to me.
It sounds like wage slavery, this concept of wage slavery.
I mean, it could be taken absolutely as the Marxist ideal of wage slavery, that you work enough just to get by, that you buy commerce goods, and so for that you have to work more to be able to buy the commerce good, and so ad infinitum. It could attribute to that theory. I'm not necessarily going towards that theory. I'm
Mhm,
just doing
mhm.
something else. If you want to take it that way, have fun. Go nuts.
Yeah, we certainly have a very imperfect system. I think it's one of the challenges really to try to make it a little bit better, to try to improve it a little bit, because it is certainly very imperfect. Then again, it's
Yeah,
better
but
than
how
it
do you
was.
know? That's like in this question of determinism and free will. So you think that we are living in an perfect system, right? So you think there might be some improvement, but how do you actually know that it's the case? Like maybe it's like exactly as it must be.
Hey, Steven Pinker would tell us it's already pretty damn good. So sorry,
I
David.
mean,
I
Yeah.
just had to get
I,
that.
I mean, the thing I would say that is the case is your argument for necessity in the past. I would say the past is the case regardless, as you understood it, as I understand as you presented it. The thing is, when we look at necessity, it is the case that it is the case for all possible worlds, is how it works. It must be the case. Fuck, I'm going to monologic
Well,
again.
this is why I can't really have a conversation taking determinism as something that I actually think, like, because I think it's impossible to have like yeah, I mean, you can say, well, why don't you think it's what it is, what exactly what it should be? I mean, yeah, maybe it is. I don't know. I mean, it's not certainly
Yeah, but you have this strive for improvement, right? You see that it's imperfect and you want to change it.
Mhm.
You want to make it better.
Yeah.
But why do you think it needs to be better? Like probably it's not about the world; it's more about your subjective perception. So maybe if you find some opportunity to see the world as it is, it may, it may stop looking as something imperfect, and maybe you don't understand how it actually is, and this is the problem. It's not the problem with the world, it's problem with your perception of the world, that you believe it must be different from what it is. So in this case, you confront reality, you confront what's here, and you project your ideas of how it must be, how it should be, on what is right now. And you, okay, let's try to change it. But why do you need to change it if it's
Well,
maybe
but
already
if-
Although,
if-
although Vladimir, the last time I checked, I'm part of the world and you're part of the world and all of us are part of the world. And I think, again,
Yeah, and
that
also in
is
the
kind
same
of
time,
leading to one of those false dichotomies that, Frank, but it's an artificial distinction.
Mhm.
Well,
Well,
what
I think
you're
I think
proposing like a cancellation of progress, though. I'm not so sure that's a very
cancellation. No,
yeah.
no, no. In terms of part of the world, yeah, you may think that we are parts of the world, but also we, like, the whole world is in us as well. So when we think about the world, what we perceive, it's like our perception of it. It's actually, it's like it's the whole. So you may look at the world as if your environment, as you said before, like you, your body, your mind, your environment. It's like it's all just the one thing. And from this perspective, you may say that whatever there is, and it's like you just looking at it, and you may choose to enjoy it, and to do something what you're doing. It's like to accept the reality, or you may try to fight it again. You try to make it different.
I don't see both things as opposites. I don't see why they're incompatible. I think you can accept the world the way it is, and I think you can
Mhm.
also strive to make the world a better place. And what I was
Yeah.
telling you when
I think
you
is and
got
ought
cancellation-
absolutely are two things.
I'm sorry.
I think is and ought absolutely are two separate things.
Yes, exactly. So I think you can accept that something is, and I think you can accept something ought to be either better or worse, or I mean, usually better, obviously. So you're hoping for something to be better. I mean, if people didn't understand those two different aspects of reality, there would be no progress. That's what I meant, right? Like if
But
someone,
maybe there is no progress. Why do you think that there is?
well, I think
So-
I
our,
think there's
I
progress.
think
in
our
different
economic
contexts.
system now is certainly better than the economic system in the 19th century. I mean,
Well, it's
I won't even be
for-
that ambiguous. I'll be on the general principle of a steam engine that was introduced in the Industrial Revolution. We are better off on the understanding of thermodynamics than we were prior to the steam engine. I'll be much more specific.
yeah,
but
yeah. I
assu-
mean,
assuming-
Ergo, I
assuming-
think we declare
And
progress.
your carbon footprint thanks you, Frank.
assuming that we are on this pale blue dot as they call it, like from our perspective, subjective perspective or societal perspective, there is progress, but like for the whole universe it looks like pretty much the same. And
Oh yeah, but who the hell is taking the subjective experience or perspective spot of Azathoth?
I'm not talking about Azathoth. I mean, I'm not talking about the because that I'm so small that I cannot even comprehend.
yeah, but again, what we
Being.
consider as progress is like
Azathoth
Yeah,
it's we who
perspective
define.
or the ant's perspective if you want to do it infinitesimally.
yeah.
And
Like
now we're back at that point, back at the jar.
the great gods of the
So-
abyss.
so
are
I wanna-
outside my comprehension, but I'm talking about human mundane things. Like capital.
It's like it may
And
it,
means
it
of
may it may
production and bank accounts and jobs and stuff like that, laws, like I'm not talking about the great mythologies of the underworld.
So I wanted to say what's really interesting is in philosophy, a lot of times there's the question, and then there's the meta question of why do we care about that question so much? So, for example, there's what is consciousness? And then there's the question, why do we care what consciousness is? And I think the same is true with free will. There's do we have free will? And then there's why are people occupied with the question of free will? And that can be an even more interesting question.
I
So-
I understand what you're saying. I understand what you're saying, but I have got to say, talking with you all, it's like to me in my mind, this is terrible, I know, but it's like there's a 1,000 piece jigsaw puzzle in front of me, and you guys are handing out the little pieces one at a time. Where does this go? And if you don't know where it goes,
That's actually very perfect. Exactly as it should be.
But yeah, going back to,
You're
so
doing a good
Vladimir
circle.
keeps bringing up this
like it.
idea of determinism, and it bothers us a lot. And the question of why it bothers us, I think, is more interesting than whether or not what he's saying is true.
Is it because there's just no real practical value in talking about determinism because it doesn't answer that question of like if we say so what, we're like, yeah, I don't know. But like if we talk about freedom in the sense that like what do we do with our quote unquote free time? With
yeah, exactly.
like that's
Oh dear.
I think it's like it helps you to realize, like when you understand that you're limited and that your time is limited and like your everything is limited, you like look at the time in from a different perspective, and you're like this idea with determinism. It's also about discipline, about like how well you understand what you're doing and how you can do what you're doing. I mean, well, when you think that there's freedom, you always think about choices and okay, there are so many choices, I might do so many things, and your attention is spread on all sorts of different possibilities. But when you think about determinism, it's basically like there's one thing, you are doing this thing, and whenever you just enjoy it. And emotions also, I think we may talk about emotions, that when you attach emotions to this conceptual understanding of freedom, again, it makes you kind of, in my case, it makes me very calm. So I don't feel irritated, I don't feel anxious about what's going on. Whenever I experience something negative, I always have this idea, okay, it was predetermined. Let's, instead of thinking and complaining about it, let's try to figure out what caused that, and let's like think about how to avoid this in the future. So again, instead of complaints and excuses, you always look for like real causes and trying to understand what's going on, instead of being, overwhelmed by some negative emotions, which basically regret and or source of emotions like that. Yeah.
And yeah, I wanted to say when I talk about the meta question, why are we concerned with this? I don't mean that in a.
Let's like think about how to avoid this.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hey, Tony. But yeah, I don't mean that in a negative way. We shouldn't be concerned with what is consciousness, what is free will. I really mean literally, what is it about us that makes us interested in those particular questions?
Well,
Yeah.
and it,
I would say, I'm sorry, David. I would say
go ahead.
it comes down to the simple, to me, it comes down to the question of existentialism, nihilism, and pretty much is the area where do our decisions matter? Do what we do, does any of it matter? And I look at that and I go, in the grand scale of the cosmos, hell no, we're just a blip that flips out or anything. But the thing I also look at is I'm like, if I understand qualia correctly, philosophically, or quality, and how it's imposed on any abstract system, I look at that and I go, well, none of us are looking from the POV or person perspective of that, the cosmos or anything. We're looking from human to human to human, to consciousness to consciousness. It's a question of the many minds problem philosophically. And I look and I go, okay, so this is a misapplication of axology on a given vast area to abducto ad absurdum and reducto ad absurdum. And I would go, at that point, I look and I go, so do things matter to us or on anything, our choices or anything? I would go, well, they matter to me. I am a subset of us. Ergo, they do matter to us, as I can infer from that area.
Okay, but then the question becomes, yes, maybe they do and maybe they don't matter to us. Why? I think that's the question that Michael is maybe interested in. Why should these things matter to us?
Yeah, that's the whole thing. I would say, but that's the thing. The why is back to Bruno's point where I'd say you're asking the why, or you're asking the ought of an ought is pretty much what you're asking at that point. And I'm going to look at that. I'm going like, okay, this is just, Vladimir already pointed this out kind of. I'm like, we're just going to get an infinite regress at this point. It's going to be like, it is because, I think it should be is, because they think it should be is, because I think it should be is, because they think it should be is. Because
David really wants to say something here. So
I'm sorry. Go ahead, David. Sorry.
Okay. From my perspective, I understand everything that's being said, but from my perspective, thousands of years ago, when people set forth in canoes to fish, and maybe they discovered another island, or they had no idea that the earth went around the sun. From their perspective, the sun rose and set, and they didn't know any better. But now we do. We know that the earth goes around the sun. And that's not just something that's spontaneously made up by scientists. That really is true. The earth does really and truly go around the sun. At one time, we did not know it, and our senses did not allow us to discern that. And gradually, we built the tools to be able to observe and figure that out for ourselves. So that is what I try to do, is to go from a position of not knowing, and to me, it is valuable to be in a position of knowing.
But I would say that's for a very particular scientific, as far as scientific research, I 100% agree or I personally feel like, yeah, we should ask these questions a lot. We should keep thinking about these scientific problems indefinitely. But philosophical things like free will, that I'm a little more curious. Like,
If I may, if
yeah,
I may, from my perspective, and this is not true for everybody, but it's something that works for me. From my perspective, and I'm going to bring this back around to what you're talking about. You know, when I was growing up, people were saying to me, "Oh, get out and find yourself," you know, or believe this, it gives life meaning, and I it took me a while, but I don't operate that way. To me, meaning, purpose, and self are not things that we find. They're things that we make. And we decide what we make them out of. We strengthen the mental muscles that give us the knowledge we crave. Now, that's not a scientific statement. That's an emotional statement from my perspective.
So
And that works for me.
you're gonna hate me for being a pedantic asshole, but the heliocentric theory was proposed first by Aristarchus around 200 and some odd BCE. And of course, what Kepler showed us is that the Earth does not go around the sun, but rather the two of them actually go around a common epicenter of an ellipse. So even as we are taught to understand certain things, we need to understand that the things that we think we understand aren't necessarily entirely correct.
I totally agree.
And that's my pedantism for the remainder of the evening.
Never hate you for
we
pedantism.
start,
Keep it up.
Should we start wrapping this up? Because we've been at it for a while. Been going at it for a while.
yeah, definitely. So yeah, but yeah, just as a final point, a lot of words, it's interesting why the word exists in the first place. So like, why do we even have a word for consciousness? Why isn't it just something where there is no word and we just don't talk about it? Like, so from an evolutionary perspective, something had to come out, like what's causing us to have a word for it, and what's causing us to be able to at least think we understand what we mean when we say it. That's just something I find interesting. But yeah.
I mean, plenty of things. That's the thing. As it is a cause, it is sufficient. And as anything is sufficient, it is simply one distinction of an infinite amount of sufficiency. Ergo, the thing is, I could say there are plenty of things that could describe consciousness, but there are also plenty of other things that there is no necessary or description of consciousness logically, or anything for that matter. Hold on.
Well, yeah, it's not a logical question, so it's not surprising that it doesn't have a logical answer.
I mean,
I like
no-
it because it's all from a subjective experience, which is very difficult to scientifically, prove. But there is some reality to it, which is really kind of interesting, and I think it's something we shouldn't necessarily ignore, especially for like philosophers, who are like kind of interested in exploring things that aren't like fully teased out.
But it's not scientific, but yet we evolved to say it. So somehow it was evolutionarily advantageous to have this word or concept and say the concept and talk about it.
Okay.
It's just do you think it's not something that's founded? It's not something that's real. If something's not like scientifically proven, it's not real.
The
No,
thing
I'm
is-
not saying that.
Okay.
I'm saying how can
I'll fix
concepts
it.
which aren't scientific be evolutionarily advantageous to have?
We have,
Well,
we have,
is
we have tons of
evolutionary to
those.
be understood as things that are necessarily scientific, or can it be?
No. Maybe we're still discovering that.
Okay. So,
For my nickel, for consciousness, it basically is a human chauvinistic excuse to say, why are we better than the other animals? And it actually goes back to concepts of the soul and derives from that.
Interesting.
So animals don't have consciousness? Is that what we're saying?
Descartes would have said that, yes.
Yeah, but we're not in Descartes, like that, you know, he cut up animals and that was weird. And I mean,
Well,
Do I think, I think I'm not convinced that plants don't have consciousness. But then I don't know that I can define consciousness with sufficient precision to say yes or no. And that kind of leads back to a Michael question of, and why does it matter to me?
but doesn't it feel like it's the only thing that does matter sometimes to the individual?
yeah.
No, it doesn't. No, that's
Oh.
not.
You
Uh,
experience it every second of your life.
I don't know. I mean, the idea
You're
that we
not?
evolved to have, I don't know, we say we evolved to have a conception of consciousness. I would look at that more so. And, you know, when people hear evolved, they think we progressed. We have, you know, an ideal of consciousness. And I look at that and I go, well, it wasn't really a linear path of evolution. We had plenty of ideals of consciousness and they got shot down or declined all over. You know, we had Phaedo, we had De Anima, we had a huge gap between that until we got, you know, Descartes' meditations, you know, that brought up the hard questions of consciousness.
Locke.
Yeah. And the whole thing that comes about when I look at that is I go, I don't want to say we evolved to have a notion of consciousness because I don't want someone to see it as like this linear progression. I more so want people to understand that there are these people who at a given time or point in history were brave enough, given, you know, Descartes' position, especially with Holland having to leave, were brave enough to go, I'm going to ask the questions that need to be asked to understand a given situation to express it.
So one last thing I'm going to say just before I sign off for the night and say see you next week.
Okay, dope.
Sometime you'll have to explain to me how that developing notion of consciousness is different from an equivalent developing notion of the soul, because it seems to me those are two very
They
parallel,
conflate very much.
parallel kinds of arguments.
I mean, Descartes.
Soul
But-
is immortal and consciousness. It's you know, it's temporary.
I agree.
Can we say?
Descartes flat out argued that the soul resided in the pineal gland of the human body, and his work was heavily influenced by On the Soul, which is De Anima, by Aristotle, and
Mhm.
Plato, which is also heavily influenced on the soul by Plato, which were both
Yes.
questions.
And so,
The idea of mind, soul, and I think Nagel puts this best, is pretty much just showing, and Searle to extent before he went crazy, puts it
They all
best,
do.
puts it best in the area where they're kind of showing something I got at earlier, where they're showing the causal link between what we consider mind and what we see as what is materially necessary in certain situations for mind, or sufficient wouldn't be necessary, sufficient for mind.
and consciousness falls out of that. How exactly?
Because
and that can be a discussion for another time. but
Okay.
Yeah,
because
let's
it's
leave
not
it
a
as
short
a
discussion.
let's leave it as a to be continued for viewers.
Okie dokie.
We gotta save something for like the following conversations.
Never.
Thanks.
Next week,
Not-
consciousness.
Thanks for watching, guys. Thanks for
Good
watching
night, all.
all our stuff.
And I-
And this is it for tonight.